The Senate has passed Trump's mega bill. What does that mean for Hawaii? We'll break it down with the governor. He'll spend his full hour with us. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suchi and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Aloha and welcome to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. I'm Yunji Denise. Ryan Kalei-Suchi is on assignment this week. We continue on in our conversation with the governor. We have so much to talk about. Let's get right to our first and only guest for the full hour today. Governor, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Yunji.
So, just this morning, the Senate moving on Trump's major tax cuts. We have still yet to see what happens in the House. But from your vantage point right now, what does this mean for Hawaii?
Well, it's going to be incredibly impactful for Hawaii and the whole country. There's so many things to share. It's very likely to pass the House, just so everyone knows. They've been instructed to pass it without change. Otherwise, it would create a lot of delay, and the president has insisted that he have a bill essentially July 4th. So this is going to become law. Let me start with the kind of major overview of the bill. I have deep concerns about the impact of the bill for America because what it has done, it has essentially extended the tax breaks for the very wealthy, and that is coming at the expense of people's health care, especially those who are on Medicaid or who get SNAP benefits, which are food stamps. So they're cutting all sorts of projects that they didn't like from the Biden era. A lot of the clean energy initiatives are being cut or suspended sooner rather than later, and all that's being done to pass on these very large tax breaks for wealthy people. So that premise is bad. Now, having said that, what a lot of us have been doing is fighting behind the scenes day in and day out, deep into the night, to try to buffer against some of the really heavy damage that will come from the bill. So the state of Hawaii, which has the best healthcare outcomes for anyone in the country, we have one of the most vibrant Medicaid programs, could get hit really hard if there are Medicaid cuts. The current bill is going to likely cut between 12 and 16 million people off of the Medicaid rolls. We have 406,000 of our people, that's 29% of our state's population, on Medicaid. But now they're going to have to go through a lot of extra hoops to stay in the program, even if they're poor, even if they are caring for disabled relatives, what have you. It's going to be very difficult. We're already preparing for that, and so we don't want to see many people go off Medicaid because they could go bankrupt. They could not have the ability to pay their bills at the hospitals and so on. So our team's already been working ahead of schedule to make sure we're buffering that. And at the last moment, I floated an idea, as did a few others around the country, that if they're going to do these deep Medicaid cuts, which would hurt the people that get cut, plus all of our rural healthcare systems, we're a rural state. When people can't pay for their bills, then those hospitals don't have as much resource and they have to close. That means the people on Medicaid lose their ability to get a doctor or a nurse caring for them, and all their neighbors who live in that community. Think of perhaps Pahala Hospital or Kohala Hospital or Molokai General. We can't afford to lose those hospitals. So we floated an idea, and I was in direct communication with Dr. Oz, who runs Medicare and Medicaid, and I suggested a $50 billion rural health fund. And that was the night before the bill passed, and that's what Senator Murkowski insisted on, because also Alaska relies on dollars for rural health care, and it made it into the bill. So that will help buffer a lot of the risk that we've had in rural communities. I'm not saying that makes the bill good. I'm just saying that that should prevent the loss of health care for a lot of rural communities in America. And so that's how, I guess, politics works. The Republicans had decided they were going to pass this bill. Only 3 Republicans voted against it, and then the tie-breaking vote came from the vice president. But some good things ultimately creeped into the bill that will hopefully help us to live to fight another day.
Okay, and I had the privilege of talking to you ahead of our conversation this afternoon and actually seeing your phone briefly, not actually going through all the messages, but just curious to see, the idea that you're texting with Dr. Oz about this. Tell me a little bit about that behind-the-scenes process, how you float $50 billion via a text message and how that actually becomes policy.
Well, it's a very expensive text message from some people's perspective, but perhaps it's a life-saving text message to others. Really what it was I went to D.C., as you know, not long ago, about 2 weeks ago, and I met with Dr. Oz, 2 Republican governors, and the 4 of us plus all of the staff members talked about a lot of the impact of the bill. I will be frank, the governors were much more conservative than me, of course, and they, both from red states, they insisted that a lot of these provisions go into effect, the cuts to Medicaid, the work rules that are in some cases pretty onerous. Though we'll work through it, we'll make it work, but they wanted this, and I said to Oz and them very directly, you're going to shutter rural hospitals if you do this. You need to have a fund. And so that's where it started. And then I was able to text Senator Murkowski, who insisted on this being part of the bill. I was able to text a lot of other people that I work more closely with, of course, my senators and so on. And that's how some legislation is getting written these days. So it's ideas. I came up with the National Health Service. Rural healthcare is in my blood. I always have felt that if you can get healthcare providers into the rural communities, that could be just as important as having healthcare insurance, provided that we actually compensate the care so people don't have to pay for it in the ER. So this is just experience, and that's how that particular provision got in. But a lot of the other ideas, of course, that I floated didn't. Some of the delays, which were being promoted by a lot of the Democratic legislators and some of the Republicans, delays in the implementation of the impacts on Medicaid also did get into the bill. For example, I don't think it's going to be before January 1, 2027 where any of these Medicaid cuts happen, which means that we will not have a hit to our budget, and other states will also not have a hit to their budgets based on Medicaid cuts until after the next, basically year and a half pass. So a lot of this was just one-on-one constant grinding with people that are in the leadership at the federal level. Sometimes it's very frustrating because, to be honest, I didn't know for sure if Dr. Oz, even though he's the head of CMS, was going to be able to impress upon some of the senators that this was a terrible idea. And I'll tell you an interesting story, perhaps. The president told me and told America that he was not going to cut Medicaid, and that he also said he did not want to spend his 4-year term being, clobbered by the U.S. Congress, by Democrats, by being investigated like he was in the first term and so on. And I told Oz that. I told Oz, look, the president told me personally he doesn't want to be investigated constantly. Well, what do you think's going to happen when you blow up Medicaid, you send a huge majority of Democrats, which probably is going to happen, into the House in 2026? You don't think that they're going to be all over the administration for these cuts? Maybe you ought to come up with something that's a little bit more civilized and kind. And is that what changed the day? I have no idea, except that I know that I proposed this $50 billion, and I'm grateful that at least it's going to be helping kind of cushion the blow from this bill.
Okay, I think there are a couple of important things that you said that I want to unpack just so that people understand. I mean, one being, 29% of our state being on Medicaid, and thinking about how many rural hospitals will be impacted. And just so that people understand that you don't need to be on Medicaid necessarily to be reliant on this program sort of in an auxiliary way, because if your neighbor, as you said, can't pay for their health care, then maybe your hospital can't exist, right? So that's really, I think, important if you would kind of explain that to people so that they understand, yes, I'm not one of that 29% in Hawaii, but I have a stake.
Yeah, think about it this way. So I was the doctor sent to Ka'u in the southern part of the Big Island, Na'alehu. 8,000 of my patients were on Medicaid, of the maybe 11 or 12,000 people that lived in the region. All of them could only go to the clinic that I was running or to the Pahala Hospital, which is a Hawaii Health Systems Corporation hospital. That hospital depends on whatever the federal government's going to pay for Medicaid rates and a few people on Medicare when they come into the hospital. It's a critical access hospital. It has to have proper payments. If you suddenly knock 2,000 of those 8,000 people off of Medicaid and they now can't pay anything, that hospital will be deeply in the red. They won't be able to keep hiring doctors. They won't be able to keep their doors open. So the hospital closes because it just lost a good portion of its ability to stay open through payments. And everybody else who drives through the region, the other people on private insurance, may be living, doing a little better, maybe they live in Volcano or Hilo and they like that hospital for some reason. It won't be there for them, or the doctors and nurses won't be hired and stay there. They'll have to go work in a place where there's more, fully covered individuals. They might have to go to Hilo or Kona, and that will play out all across rural America and all across Hawaii. So we have to keep reimbursements intact in our Medicaid program.
Okay, so we are still expecting 12 to 18 million, I think is what the overall figure is, people to be kicked off of this program.
Right.
But you say they have this $50 billion fund now. So how will this work? Will these hospitals then apply for money that then saves them, or how does that work? Because you still have all those people who are then kicked off the system.
Right. So the hospitals will make applications for grants, and they'll be funded. The way I proposed it was based on population and isolation. So the deal, for instance, that Alaska was able to cut was they're going to get a good hunk of money for being so rural, which we will ultimately, I believe, get the same consideration, because there's historically this approach to Alaska and Hawaii, which is called the non-contiguous states rule, meaning we're the two states that aren't connected to the mainland, so we have higher costs, we have higher overhead, and so on. So we've always kind of been coupled together, and so we will get a little extra of this money. Usually about one out of every 250, dollars that gets put into a federal budget somehow finds its way to Hawaii based on population. We have 1.4 million people out of the 340 million or so people in America. And there's usually that little extra consideration because we're essentially a frontier state like Alaska, where we're, in a place where the population per square mile is quite low in a lot of places. That's how we survive in some of these programs. That's what will happen. We will get extra grants. Also, there was all this chatter, and a lot of this is, pretty wonkish inside baseball, but there was a lot of talk about the special taxes that hospitals end up having. They're called provider taxes. What they do is they are taxed, and then they get matching monies from the federal government and get all the money back. That's also going to get phased out over time, but that date got pushed out at least 2 years. So what's going to happen is I was speaking with Senator Schatz this morning, and boy, he's been really working overtime, long hours, God bless Brian, and Maisie and others. We're going to get together with a Tiger team of his team, my team, our hospital leaders, probably Hilton Rathel and his guys, that's who I mean, and then also our Medicaid program. And we're going to just go through every last point that ultimately emerges from the bill once it passes the House and the president presumably signs it. So we will see exactly what rules we have to live up to and when, and how we keep all these dollars in our healthcare system so that we don't suffer, closures. Now, having said all of that, I was already prepared with $200 million to support our healthcare system and our safety net. It does appear that we won't have to do that this year or next year, which is, a blessing. Plus, as Senator Kochi pointed out to me, we were talking this morning, we did get the $550 million from the Plavix settlement, which really took a lot of the pressure off of us in the immediate moment. So that means we will not need to have a special session in all likelihood because we have enough resources without having to do any cuts. I did trim $110 million off of the $20 billion budget, specifically to be careful with our dollars. No one will feel that because we can put some programs out a year. And in many cases, the Department of Education, which is some of that line item, just don't have the capacity to spend all of it in year one. So it's no change. We're going to support all of our kids, but the projects that are expensive may be paused. All of these things keep us afloat. We're totally fine. But I was anticipating the worst case scenario was, perhaps if they passed this bill, the changes on Medicaid went into effect immediately. The changes on SNAP, that's the kind of the supplemental nutritional dollars. That's what SNAP stands for. If we had to do that so, people wouldn't go hungry, we were prepared to fill in those dollars. But we should be okay. I still remain concerned about SNAP. We can talk about that. There's a really crazy circumstance that arose in the last minutes on the bill that did not help us. But in general, people should know we're going to be okay. We won't need a special session, and I won't have to adjust anything else right now, not the tax breaks that we've given to people who are struggling, our Alice families, nor will we see hospitals close unless the federal government does something that we don't foresee yet. The bill, as I've been able to read it so far, doesn't hurt us right now.
Okay, so we don't know what the House is going to do, but all things being equal, things staying as they are, you're saying no need for a special session because we have this now, they've included this $50 billion going to rural health care nationwide, but
Yes.
we expect to get a piece of that. That stabilizes the budget for now. And then these other cuts, you're saying, they will be coming, but they'll be coming down the line, so we don't need to act so quickly.
Right. So that $50 billion, if you divide it by 250, which is, like I said, about the factor for us. And then over the 10 years, this is a $50 billion 10-year appropriation. We should get between $25 and $30 million extra per year. That offsets a lot of the concerns that would arise from Medicaid cuts. And believe me, I'm going to fight to keep all of our people on Medicaid coverage. It just is going to require some very heavy lifting because the new rules are somewhat onerous, and I don't think the senators that were voting on this bill, voting in favor of this bill, understand why a person doesn't go and work sometimes. Well, maybe they are illiterate. Maybe they have both an elderly parent they're caring for and a child, and there's no job in a rural part of the country. They can't meet certain requirements, and therefore they end up on Medicaid. There are reasons that people end up on Medicaid. And if anyone's gaming the system, that's totally okay to have them move on and go work, of course. But there are a lot fewer people gaming the system than there are people struggling.
To that point, and we love to include the audience, and thank you for those who are engaging right now on the Facebook page. Carla's saying, ask the governor how many in Hawaii on Medicaid are able-bodied or illegal. We don't want to pay for them. Now, to be clear, illegal immigrants do not qualify for this benefit, but the able-bodied question is really what Republicans say they're targeting. How widespread do you think that issue is?
It's extremely rare. And, people used to call me all the time and say, I saw a guy driving a fancy car and they're on Medicaid. Look, it's rare. And most of the people on Medicaid most of them are women of childbearing age and children who are in poverty. One out of two children historically have had Medicaid needs over, kind of the immediate past history in America. For those, like I said, if they're gaming the system, of course, we're going to do what we can to get them to work. Because remember, we have a separate piece of legislation in Hawaii that's very good, which is if you work 20 hours or more, 3 weeks consecutively, your employer gives you health insurance. It covers it. So there's very few people in that category. But the cynical view that person is espousing is quite ugly, because what often happens is an individual, like I said, they may have no opportunity. You might think they're able-bodied, but that's very judgmental. We are, first of all, getting half of the dollars from the federal government, and we're preventing much larger costs and hits to the healthcare system by keeping them on some kind of insurance. And if they're still making too little money, let's say that they're only making $13 an hour or $15 an hour, that's $30,000 a year, and they're paying rent. There's no way they can afford private insurance. So they may very well end up getting either health insurance through the Prepaid Health Act, the Affordable Care Act, or Medicaid. So in America, there are 71 million Americans, 1 in 5, that are on Medicaid, and that's because there's a lot of poverty out there. The idea that we can simply cut somewhere between 12 and 16 million people off of Medicaid it's quite harsh, and it's going to be a very bad move from a policy standpoint, because we're going to all pay more. When those individuals end up not being able to pay their hospital bills, it's going to have to come from somewhere. It's going to either have to come from state taxes or subsidies, which I'm fighting for, or they're just going to charge more to private employers that give us all health insurance when we're working. And people's insurance costs are going to go up, probably that person's. So think very carefully before judging, because a lot of people have gone through tough times. And I acknowledge if someone's able-bodied and can work, we will find them a job and get them on regular health insurance. But it's not quite as easy as you might think.
Okay, so there's the federal tax cuts that that we're anticipating. There's also a number of budget cuts that we have seen. National Science Foundation comes to mind. The university, of course, absorbing a lot of cuts to research funding.
Yes.
We see what's happening with astronomy in our state, right? There are a number of cuts outside of this bill
Yes.
that are happening, particularly in the areas of science, climate, health research, things like that, and in the nonprofit space. all of my friends who work in nonprofits, they're all very, very concerned about cuts to federal programs. Outside of this, now that this seems sort of triaged, if you will, with that $50 billion, what are your concerns about sort of the larger cuts that we're seeing, the federal policy and the changes we're seeing, particularly in the science space?
It's very disconcerting. So this could definitely cost us any chance at a global, I guess I would say, a global compromise on the question of Mauna Kea and astronomy. So there are going to be a lot of cuts. The cuts to the National Institute of Health are going to cripple research, especially in the area of cancer research. That's a big problem. The university cuts are vast. Now, I was able to fight off about $600 million of university cuts. That was when there was an allegation of anti-Semitism against several universities, and frankly, Hawaii was not really a part of that. Hawaii is not perfect, and of course, some people were very vocal during the protests over the war. I respect everyone's opinion, but we were not and are not an anti-Semitic university, and so I was able to, with a couple phone calls, get us off that list. So we didn't get that cut, but the cuts are still very broad. The things that we're doing for nonprofits, I will sign this bill next week on the 9th. That is to apply $50 million to nonprofits. We're getting special help from the United Way. And by the way, I do want to note that that Mark Benioff gave us $1 million to help administer those grants so that we didn't have any overhead. So many thanks to Mark and Lynn Benioff. Amazing of them to do that. Just made it, kind of a more robust appropriation. So our nonprofits are going to get some help. They may need more help. That may come in the form of extra appropriations next session because, again, if people fall through the cracks, if they're hungry, we're going to care for them. That's what I want to do as governor. And we can have that debate. We will have that debate, at the appropriation level and out in public. But that's one thing. Another thing that we did, and I'm grateful that we did it, is we passed the climate impact fee because I anticipated getting less and less support potentially from the federal government on issues related to climate change. As you can tell, they're pulling back a lot of appropriations and a lot of support for any renewable energy programs or climate-related disasters, including potentially very deep cuts to FEMA over time. Now, through some positive relationship work that I've been doing quietly, and I know some people have pause about me working at all with the current administration, it's my job to make sure that whatever happens doesn't happen in such a severe way to hurt our people that we can't deal with it. So I have had very good conversations with the head of Homeland Security and many of the top officials in the current administration, and was able to make sure, along with good work from Mayor Bisson, that they are giving us the full $1.6 billion for Maui's recovery. That plus the settlement, which we paid for already, means that Maui will get to heal. The houses are actually going up. I even heard a wonderful story where Kalaiola, where we have the transitional houses, one individual came and gave us their key back yesterday because they are now moving into their house again, their rebuilt house. And that key will now go in the hand of another individual family that needs a place in transition until their house is built. So we're healing, but it's a lot of monies from that disaster and that recovery pool. The green fee, the climate impact fee, will now have a very robust process where we're going to bring tons and tons of people to the table from all the environmental groups, from my administration, head of DLNR, probably some of the leadership from transportation. Will Kane from my team is going to be one of the point people on this, and I've teased him. Everyone should reach out to Will Kane. They should, to know when we're going to have these meetings. We'll have some public meetings. We'll get input, and that will be $100 million a year to do a lot of other work. Plus, for every $4.5 million of that fund that we choose to set aside for bonds, we can have a bond of $100 million to do big projects, big recovery, help with you name it. So that's another move that we made strategically in advance of this era of cuts.
I want to go to the green fee actually now, and then I want to talk about HTA. There's so much that we have to talk about, and it feels like so little time, even though we do have the full hour. Since you brought up the green fee, when you talk to folks in the climate space, they say realistically we actually need $400 million a year to really handle what's happening to Hawaii.
Yes.
At the pace that it's happening. And that $100 million, when it was agreed upon, was not designed to shore up these federal cuts. That's really not the intent of this money. And so, knowing that, how will you prioritize where those funds go? Because you don't necessarily want this just to basically backfill the federal cuts.
Totally correct. Yes. So I think the number is actually 500 million based on the study that our climate advisory team put together. And that's the impact of climate change on the state of Hawaii. But 400 or 500 million dollars, depending how much erosion we see in one year, how much we deal with in stronger storms and so on. So let's unpack this a little bit. So we're going to have $100 million coming in per year. That's from an increase in the TAT, the transient accommodation tax, of 0.7% for any time anyone goes and stays at a hotel, short-term rental, a cruise ship, cabin, and so on. It'll be pretty minimal on we in Hawaii because most of it's going to be on the 10 million travelers, okay? And we will work to find extra offsets for our local people, which is really the tax cuts on employment that I'm able to cut for our local workers. Okay. Now, how do you get to 400 or 500 million when you only have $100 million? So my hope is, and the committee is going to have to talk about this, my hope is we will set aside somewhere between 18 and $20 million each year and use that money to do bonds and to bond larger projects. 18 to $20 million will give us the power to bring in $400 to $500 million to do a road that's eroding, or beach restoration, or large fire breaks that are necessary to help, West Maui or Waianae or Waikoloa, where there are a lot of fires. So that pays for it. When you pull out for each $4.5 million, you pull out of the fund, and it needs to be done really through a special fund, though there are other ways to do bonds, but I don't want to bore people to death in this conversation, okay? By getting those bonds in place, that's how you get to the $400 or $500 million of projects. And then that money, which is set aside in perpetuity as it pays down the bond over 20 years, pays for the project. That was the beauty of this plan, and necessary. I actually think a lot of other states are going to have to consider this because California, for example, had their terrible fire in LA, and they're facing tens of billions of dollars of damage and recovery, which they may never see from the federal government. So that's how we're going to do it, and that would leave. So you do about $20 million of the annual green fee into bonding, leaving the other $80 million to be split into three categories. And those three categories are spelled out in the bill. It's supposed to be equal. They essentially are for fire mitigation and dealing with storms, so fires and potential tsunamis and hurricanes and so on. So that's important. And then a third of the money directly to like sustenance of the land, sustainability, improving, essentially all that is affected by climate change, sustainability. And a lot of nonprofits should apply for these grants. We'll be doing that with them. And then the final third is specifically for sustainable tourism, like when we lose a beach or a beach park is in disarray, or climate has affected with us with overgrown vegetation. We need to do good things to maintain tourism, and that was the commitment I made to the hotel industry and to the tourism industry and to the people of Hawaii to do sustainable tourism so that we can deal with the impact of 10 million visitors. So that's how we break it down. We will be fully accountable. We will have a website we're going to use. I am told the climate advisory team, the CAT team's website is going to be updated now that their initial project is done, updated so we can show people month over month how much money is being spent, where it's being spent, so it's not just backfilling, like you said, projects that we're going to fight for. It's meant to be new projects, and that's very important to me. So we're the first in the nation to do this. I think we should all celebrate it together. We're even going to, when we do big projects, put those plaques up on them that you've seen before when it says this project's being done by the Department of Transportation and Governor so-and-so. We're going to say this project is being supported by the Climate Impact Fee. Mahalo to all the visitors that are helping us keep Hawaii extraordinary. So that's our approach. That's the plan. It won't be perfect, but it's going to get going in a nice way, and I think it's going to help us.
We're going to go to break in just a minute, but I want to get in one more question on healthcare, and then we'll move on, and the cuts. This is from Lauren, who says, what about the cuts to the Affordable Care Act? Do we have any safety net for those cuts? As a small business owner that has to use the exchange to purchase our own insurance, the cost of premiums could likely become unsustainable with the passage of this bill. Another part of healthcare about, that whole ecosystem that is being impacted.
No, that's a very good question. And so part of this discussion that we'll be having next week will be about how much money from, for example, the $200 million we set aside, how much do we buffer the changes? Do we have to subsidize our own exchange more to make sure that we don't see such suffering for small businesses? And my hope is in Hawaii, because we should see a very minimal bump in the uninsured rate, assuming we do a good job keeping the lid on Medicaid, keeping people fully enrolled. We hope to not see that kind of wave or that tsunami, if you will, hitting everybody in our market. Our marketplace is pretty well contained here to Hawaii, right? So that is our approach, but I am going to be open to using some of our, well, number one, our Plavix dollars, which I committed to people would be used for healthcare to some degree, right? It was a healthcare crisis. We're going to invest a hunk of that money into healthcare support. That's one place where we can find monies to help individuals like she. And then also, we will make sure that the subsidy that comes in, this, certainly going to be more than $25 million, maybe it'll be $30 million, is available as a federal appropriation specifically to keep our healthcare system intact. And so it won't just be for people that are Medicaid or the rural hospitals. It'll be for the people that use rural hospitals, and that could very well be people that are on the exchange.
Okay, still a lot to talk about. We're going to ask about the Hawaii Tourism Authority, its future, and what the governor wants to see in the next CEO. You're watching Spotlight now. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. We are continuing on in our conversation with the governor. Spent a lot of time talking about what's happening at the federal level and now want to get to more local news. And of course, something that has been dominating the headlines is the Hawaii Tourism Authority. On this program, the last time you were here, you said that you wanted the entire board to resign. That is something that you have followed up with saying publicly.
Yes.
Where are you with those resignations? Have you received all the ones or all of them?
Sure.
And how is that going?
It's going well. So, truth be told, the bill only became effective today. Today's July 1st. I signed it a couple days ago. And a couple things. We have changed the structure based on what the legislature recommended, and I'm really supportive of them, and I think they did the right thing to make the Hawaii Tourism Authority Board advisory. So it's not an entity that makes all the decisions for tourism in the state. They now will just report directly to me. And because it's changed and they're advisory, I did humbly ask them to resign. A few may still want to be reappointed, but I thought the right thing to do was to just clean the slate, have everybody resign. And I believe we've gotten all of the resignations, but maybe one, and they're working out their last little differences. But I think that's going to happen. And then if they want to be considered again in this advisory role, they're still going to have to be approved by the Senate. Then I will consider them. I really had a problem, though, and I want to be direct. I had a problem with the infighting that was going on that you saw all too often, out in public view. The infighting between factions, I don't want that. So I will not have factions in the advisory Hawaii tourism entity. I will have everyone working for the good of Hawaii, making sure we have tourism that can be sustained. We've had to fight through a lot of challenges. We inherited a couple problems. One was we didn't have the contracts in place for marketing for the state and management for the state. So the first week or two that I became governor, we quickly had to go through a review of that procurement, get that straight. We got it sorted so that they weren't all suing each other, and we went ahead. That was the contracts between HVCB and the Native CNHA. The Council of Native Hawaiian Advancement. They've done a pretty good job, actually, and they've worked together. The next phase, though, was getting the board members to work together, but all of those board members had been appointed by my predecessors, and honestly, it was about 50-50 split. Good people. They're all good people, but they were at each other's throats on occasion, and I can't have that. It is too tough to compete with other markets if we're fighting ourselves. So that's why I've asked them to all submit their resignations, and then I will vet a group that I think will all be able to work together. And I will find other responsibilities if people want to still participate in government, volunteer on other boards, work in the state. These are good people, but there can't be fighting. So I will have a new advisory board, I bet, by the next time we talk. Another important thing that advisory board will do is they will have to come up with the new criteria for an executive director or president, CEO, if you will, of HTA. Because our transition is still ongoing. I've decided that president CEO should be paid more modestly than has been in the past because now the contracts are in place. They will report directly to me per the bill. And so they're going to have to figure out the right kind of person to hire. And I'm going to be somewhat involved in that because they're going to have to report to me. So I think that long term we're going to have a much more civilized situation at the HTA. There's a lot of things that have been going on. Okay, let's talk about the good and the bad, if I may. They were fighting over some of the budget items. Now, a lot of it was very good. Like, for example, I think it was good that we entered into a relationship with the Rams. And why? Because 40% of all of our tourism comes from California. We're shoring up California. There's a lot of very influential people that support professional sports. They invest in Maui. They love Maui. Maui had been hit hard. They came and they spent a ton of money and promoted their team. We spent a total, I believe, of just around $1.5 million. But then they had this hitch where there was this additional consideration for a promotion party. Maybe the contract should have been done more professionally or tighter. But truth be told, what people didn't read was that the Rams were donating tens and tens of thousands of dollars to girls flag football and setting up camps that were free for kids that were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the marketing that went into this was quite profound. it's good, in my opinion, for us to continue to promote Hawaii, sometimes with sports, sometimes with celebrities, sometimes with different parts of the tourism divisions. But people were getting tired of it being a little bit too, I guess, fast and loose. And so that's what's getting cleaned up. We've agreed to an audit, of course. That will happen. Director Tokioka is on top of this. And in the meanwhile, we're making sure that we are looking forward because, people had their differences, but a lot of the time it was people taking shots at each other if they didn't like one another very much. I don't like to operate that way. I find it very wasteful. And so that's what the future holds.
Well, to be clear, this is a volunteer board. I don't know if the public totally understands that this is a lot of work. Those folks don't get paid.
Right.
How much of them do you expect to return? I mean, given all the controversy that's happened, why would anyone want to be on that advisory committee?
Well, 2 or 3 of them are very passionate about the specifics of tourism. Some are very interested in what happens with our advertising dollars or our promotion because they work in tourism and they may represent a county that doesn't get as much tourism, and so they want to be a good advocate for their friends or families or their community. So there's a lot of interest in the Hawaii Tourism Authority Board historically. Also, remember, we have a whole Hawaii Tourism Authority of just plain hardworking people, okay? So those guys, with very few exceptions, are calmly going through their days, making sure that tourism keeps clicking along. Actually, our revenues are up slightly. The numbers of travelers continue to be down from Japan and Canada because, the president did talk about taking over Canada and that made the Canadians crazy. But the truth is, I'm encouraging Canadians to come. They helped us a lot through our crisis. They helped us a lot after COVID, and we care about them. So I'm doing my best to put a good face on different tourism markets for Hawaii. That's why we also did that $6 million promotion for Maui. The Maui Week thing was extremely successful. We went out to 15 markets. They gave us tens of millions of dollars of free advertising in places like San Diego, LA, in Texas, over in New York, Denver. I mean, it was extraordinary. And so, again, kudos to the board and to the workers at the Tourism Authority and Director Tokioka for making that happen, along with our hotel guys who were great, and they threw in $2 million of their own money. So a lot of good things happen, but it is true that the unpleasant stuff splashes on the newspapers quite boldly, and I just had enough. So we're moving on.
How soon do you expect to have a new CEO?
That's a good question. The legislature would like us to get an individual in there, at least someone that bridges the gap for the next couple of years soon. But they have to get their feet kind of grounded. It's going to take a few months to do that. In the meanwhile, all the big decisions have already been made by the team and by the director coming straight to me. And we have these 2 large firms that are doing, I think, $64 million of advertising. They're professionals that have been in the game for a long time. They're doing the work. The day-to-day of a volunteer board, as you just said, is somewhat minimal. So it's not that big a deal, but the CEO will be important. And that's going to be the captain of the ship. I've heard from some people that they're interested, but this advisory board is going to have to see their names and vet them.
Okay, you have 20 bills on your veto list. Let's talk about a few of those if we could briefly. 20 on the intent to veto list. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that all 20 are going through. One thing we do expect are the tax credits, and that was of course to help the film industry and also energy. But I'm wondering the impact of ending clean energy tax credits on state energy goals.
Yes, so I'm vetoing that bill. I think I'm going to veto 8 or 9 bills total out of the 321 that came to me from the legislature. So they got about 3,000 bills submitted to be vetted. They passed about 321, and I'm ultimately going to veto just, say, 8, plus a couple of those smaller line item vetoes in the budget that were very manini compared to the size of the budget, just so people know. But yeah, the tax credits will stay, especially now more than ever with the federal government getting rid of renewable tax cuts, tax incentives for like solar. It's going to be phased out, I believe, in the course of like the next year and a half or so. Unless people get their projects going, they're going to lose their tax credits. So a lot of people are going to accelerate their projects, which could be good. And I'm going to keep our tax credits in place. Plus film, I really believe in the film industry, and I believe that it should be vibrant in Hawaii. So I just didn't agree with that.
Can we make 2040 though without those federal tax credits?
2045.
Oh, sorry,
Yes,
2045.
but we will have a harder time. That's a much larger discussion, which we could have a whole discussion on energy, and I would love to do it with you going forward, because it's going to be difficult. They're going to move a lot of their energy incentives and credits over to other modalities, energy modalities. They're going to probably, and I've met now on a couple occasions with the Secretary of Energy, and he's very intelligent, very good guy actually, Mr. Wright, and he told me that they're going to move to things like geothermal support. They're going to move to LNG support. They're going to move to nuclear support. And I'm not trying to spark new, controversies here on the show per se. I just think that if there are large incentives out there and they're not going to support as much solar, that's where I've been positioning us in case to have this bridge to 2045 with some very modest amount of, say, some LNG, if we get other people to support the infrastructure. I know that gives the solar guys hives, okay? But what I'm saying is we don't want to see our entire renewable energy plan derailed. I won't let that happen. So I'm going to stay nimble and see what I can get out of the federal government. I might even be able, and I went and proposed this, I might be able to get very large grants from the Department of Defense to help support our energy infrastructure after the wildfire, after what we did to support HECO. And remember, the military relies on HECO very significantly. They consume about 17% of the energy that somehow or other goes into HECO and into our state grid. They needed HECO to survive. We did what was necessary to not have them go bankrupt and to prevent big surges in cost. Very challenging, okay? Because I know people have, very strong feelings about whether or not we should have changed our energy partners altogether. But HECO has been doing what they can now to mitigate against future fires. I've been very clear that I don't want to see spikes in price, and we did pass a bill. In fact, I signed it this morning. I will tell you, just quietly in my office, I signed the bill to go forward with what was called securitization. That allows for a small increment in increased rates to be used for bonds and to decrease the need for big spikes in bills. So we were facing really large increases in energy costs, but the securitization bill that the ledge gave us should help a lot. So I did sign that bill. Also, that means that HECO will now be able to borrow money again. Their bond ratings went up so that they can invest in infrastructure. It's part of a lot of work behind the scenes. Invest in that infrastructure to keep us safe, to hopefully change out some of their energy infrastructure so they're more efficient. And frankly, I'm going to stay open-minded about other sources of energy if they will decrease our carbon consumption and decrease cost. I don't know if people know this, but you know where we get most of our oil from? Libya. We get most of our oil from Libya, which is crazy, okay? This is not 1985 where we have the Libyans coming and attacking us on, Back to the Future. This is Hawaii buying oil from Libya. It's terrible. And so it would be great to get off of that oil and, of course, be on solar, of course, be on wind, of course, be on geothermal, but also take advantage of what opportunities there are out there if they include LNG. And that would just be on the short bridge to 2045. That's the commitment I make.
Okay, I want to ask you about a few more things. We only have, about five minutes or so, and I want to tick through a few things. The last time you were here, you said the head of the East-West Center and the new AD for UH would be named soon. You were obviously correct. We know. Let's start with Matt Elliott and your thoughts about him coming in. You had an opportunity, I understand, to meet with him. What's your impression, and what do you think he's going to do for the university when it comes to athletics?
I like that guy. Really gentle person. He came and had great experiences at UCLA in this field. And then also he's been at the Hawaii Community Foundation for some years, so he knows Hawaii. One of the things I loved about him, just to be frank, was he's got like a 5-year-old. He believes in this kid and raising him here. He is so committed to Hawaii, and he had a certain gentle nature about him, but he also knows how to fundraise. So he met a lot of the criteria that I had personally. We had 2 other great finalists, by the way, and Matt ended up being the guy that got chosen, and I think he's going to be terrific. So I think he may need to have some deputies that have even longer term commitments and experience with Hawaii, but it's a fresh start, and I think he can raise money. And there was a lot of consensus behind the scenes that he was going to be a good pick. He didn't upset anybody. He seemed very smart and competent. And then I got to say that our president, she made a great decision, I think. It is a difficult decision. She's only been on the job for a short while to select him. So we'll see what the deputies might be.
Okay, and sticking with athletics, interested to know from you the stadium, right?
Yes.
And where we stand with that. I know that you had said that you're lobbying for outside money. Where do we stand with that? I know you don't have a name, obviously, otherwise you would announce it, right?
I would for sure. So we gave them another 6 or 8 weeks to finalize the details of their contract with our current developer, so we won't miss the deadlines to begin the deconstruction of the demolition, of the stadium this fall. And then we have to start building. We are going to leave the 2 large kind of anchors, the concrete pylons, as part of the stadium. That's what Stanford Carr has been able to come up with as a plan, which is very smart. We will have enough money for phase 1 for 25,000 seats, it looks like to me. But we still have to wait and see if we get some kind of suitor to agree to the overtures. I mean, I've been filming ads actually directly to them, or appeals directly to them, and talking to them when I know them in person.
Wait. So back up for a second. You're filming ads for like an audience of 1
1.
to 5? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So it's you, I'd imagine your press secretary on her phone, and you're saying, "Hi, so-and-so,
Yes.
million billionaire,
Yes.
please fund our stadium." Is that what's
Some of that, yes, some outreach that way, and just a personal appeal as governor if they would like to be part of what we're doing. Plus, we often know the person. Sometimes it's just a phone call directly to them and a chat over, lunch. But other times it's necessary, I think, for a governor to reach out. For example, just today, the governor of Ohio lit $600 million for their stadiums. Now, the Browns suck, so I don't know exactly if that's going to be a good investment, but they are going to get some stadium support. And we did $350 million, and we know the Warriors can be great when they are playing in a good place. So they can be great when they're not playing in a great stadium too, but it's harder. So that plus the NIL money, which we're going to have to be supportive of if we want to be competitive. The deal has been cut. It's about $22 million per school that they're allowed to invest. The reason you invest in these things, although normally I'd put money into homeless programs, like we have now 21 Cal Hale, over 800 people. It's helping us a lot. But that money usually generates big TV contracts and brings a lot more money to all of the sports. And that's why you invest in these things, in addition to helping our kids. So, yeah, I film those ads and I talk to people, and sometimes it works. Sometimes we get suddenly $50 million for a hospital, matching state monies, sometimes more than that. And a stadium is a tougher sell because it's not essential services. But it is, I think, essential to the state of mind for, the state of Hawaii. So I still support it, and I'm just going to keep going forward as long as I'm in office.
And briefly, Celeste Connors for East West Center, the new president there. Great choice.
Yeah, I really like Celeste a lot. She, again, has worked across both political aisles. She's worked as a diplomat. She has done a great job on energy considerations and the organization she's been with Green Growth. She worked at the UN. She's a local girl, a local woman professional who is just very dynamic. I think she's going to do a great job. And so a lot of nice balance. So as you've seen, we've tried to have good balance, men and women, different professions. That's where our courts are. That's where our athletics and East West Center are. That's where you're going to see the Supreme Court is. I will have to pick a new Supreme Court justice, Chief Justice next year. It's going to be a few big moments. Maybe we'll talk about it here on the show. And maybe even another Associate Justice if one of the current justices in the Supreme Court ascends to the Chief Justice position. So all these things are important. I will share with everyone. There were some contentious bills. One was about the judges' pensions. That bill, it appears, will go forward. They have 5 or 6 years to work out some of the differences, but I've asked the Chief Justice, who did a great job negotiating for his branch of government this year with the legislature. We supported women's courts and community courts, and he was a great CJ, still is for another few months. I'm going to ask him to come and be an advisor to me on the future of the courts and on the future of pensions, because this bill goes into effect and will be, part of what we are in the state. We're going to talk about other things. We're going to talk about the last few bills in these coming days that may or may not need to get vetoed. We're still making up our minds on one or two bills. And I know it's difficult, even for people that are very dear to me in my administration, when they see, for instance, the asset forfeiture bill. Legislature passed it with big numbers. Some of law enforcement is reticent to see that go into effect. But, when the legislature gives me a bill and they've been like 80 to 90% in favor of it, it's kind of my obligation to follow their policy lead, unless there's a deep flaw in a bill. And then let's assume for a second that I do sign that bill on asset forfeiture, which makes it more difficult for regular people to lose their assets if they get caught up in a problem. We want criminals to have their assets taken when they're charged. If that happens, again, we'll have the legislature work closely with Ann Lopez, my highly respected Attorney General, and we'll improve bills. But I like to move forward. And so that's why I'm not vetoing much legislation, and why I'm continuing to press the federal administration to calm down a little bit on some of what they're doing. And hopefully we saw a good result in some areas. A lot remains to be seen. There's a lot of time ahead.
Oh my gosh, we covered so much ground, and yet I could do another hour just talking to you. Thank you so much, Governor. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, you bet.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. We'll continue right after this.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live. We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suchi. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great to spend the full hour with Governor Josh Green today. We covered a lot of ground, of course, focusing the first half of the hour on what's happened in Washington earlier this morning with the Senate passing the lion's share of Trump's tax initiatives, big cuts coming to Medicare and Medicaid, the SNAP program, but the governor saying that his personal connections and conversations with authorities in Washington, including Dr. Mehmet Oz, may have helped to offset some of that impact with $50 billion over 10 years that will be allocated to rural health care throughout the country. Hawaii expecting to get some of that money, and what that will essentially do is save a lot of rural health care community hospitals, of course, that so many folks here in Hawaii rely on. 29% of the state, as the governor did point out, is reliant on Medicaid. So we are expecting there to be big impacts, but hopefully not the collapse of the healthcare system that some were talking about, and that there was this talk of needing a special session. The governor's saying that because of that rural health care fund that is part of the Senate package, they will no longer need to have a special session. That's big news. Also, we spent a good amount of time talking about HTA. We'll be back next week. We'll be talking about insurance. We leave you now with a shot of beautiful Reef Runway and the lovely outdoors. We'll see you next week. Aloha. Oh, okay. So I'm still talking, but it's gone. Yeah. That's okay. That's quite all right.
You made it.
Oh, we survived. Good shot, sir. Yeah. That's like no fun in the middle of the day. Mahalo for that.